ZeniMax Media hired me to do Elder Scrolls Online. They knew that they wanted to take Elder Scrolls into the MMO universe. At the time, it was soon after Oblivion had launched, so they knew it was a huge IP. Everyone had called Oblivion the single-player MMO, and so it seemed like a reasonably logical thing to do to make an MMO out of it. Bethesda Game Studios is, of course, the studio where all the other Elder Scrolls games have been developed, and our relationship with them is fantastic. Todd Howard has been a big supporter of this project since the beginning. He and I went over the basics for the game when it was just a 3-page overview of here is where the game is going to be set, here are the basics for it, here are kind of 5 statements about the game. So he and I went over that. He was enthusiastically in support of it. Since then, Bethesda helps us with lore. We have a very strong bridge between our two studios with lore masters in each one. The relationship with Bethesda Game Studios is that. It is, we're collaboratively working on this. But of course, Todd Howard is the Elder Scrolls, guy, so we make sure that everything we do in game is okay. Setting things in the past when you're working with an IP like this has a lot of advantages. First, you can tell a lot more stories that aren't directly tied to the stories that the players know and love from the time period that they're familiar with. So the classic example of this is Knights of the Old Republic in the Star Wars IP, where you can go back and you tell a story with factions that you know, races that you know, parts of Tamriel that you know, but no one knows really what happened in the Second Era because no one has experienced that in a game yet. So it gives you all of the characters and all the features, but none of the stories. So it was kind of a blank slate for us in that sense. The vision for the game kind of came together very quickly, and that was we have this awesome player versus environment experience that we're getting from Oblivion and now Skyrim. We don't want to change that. We want to have an awesome, everywhere I go I find something to do, I can discover, I can explore, interesting stories, interesting characters. Like, that comes with the IP, so we wanted to make sure we have that. And then with my background from Mythic and Dark Age Camelot, I wanted a kick-ass PvP system because all of the Elder Scrolls games, every one of them has a conflict built into the main story. Well, in Elder Scrolls Online, you can actually be one of those factions and actually join in the fight against, in a war situation between the different alliances. We knew we wanted to put parts of all of the provinces in the game, so that you could explore at least a little piece of every province. That kind of drew the boundaries for what we were going to do. And from that, it was, well, looking at the map, where would the alliances form, where would be logical places for the races to coalesce into alliances. Every Elder Scrolls game has a different cultures in game. So if you think of Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, it took place in Morrowind, but as you were exploring through the province, you found different ruins. There's the Dwemer culture, which resurfaced in Skyrim. There were Daedric temples and dungeons. So that meant to us, we need to make sure when we do our areas of Morrowind that there are also Daedric ruins and Dwemer ruins. And in that sense, when you go into our version of Morrowind, you find those things. We have some additional wrinkles on that because 1,000 years in the past, it can be a little different. In our version of Cyrodiil, and we really made a concerted effort to make sure that the height map was the same, so that the hills felt the same. Wherever there's a cave in Oblivion, there's essentially a cave in our version of Cyrodiil. The ruins look the same. We made a huge effort to make sure that the art felt the same, felt similar. So when you were in our version of Cyrodiil, you feel at home, like you would in Oblivion. So we built a studio. Of course, we were looking for experienced people, but we really wanted to make sure that we had a good community of game developers that wanted to work together, that wanted to show up and work together every day. This is a long process. Tempers get short sometimes, believe it or not. There's lots of arguing. You want to make sure that you have that group of people that is capable of doing that. The core group has been here for a long time, very strong, and now we're at the point now where we're growing to maximum capacity to get the game going now that it's in production. It has been somewhat of a challenge finding experienced MMO developers because, of course, they're hugely in demand right now all over the world. And but we've gotten a really strong group, and we're really happy with it. So the naming it actually proved to be somewhat of an exercise, and we started with Elder Scrolls Online. Then we came up, especially after determining that the game was going to take place 1,000 years before, with Elder Scrolls Origins. The problem with Origins is when we start to do expansions and think about things in the future, that name just doesn't really make sense. You know, the Elder Scrolls Origins second expansion, it just doesn't make sense. We did consider other names. The marketing guys, Whiteboard is full of names that failed to make the cut. Tamriel was definitely on that. Empires was on that. So really, we just went back to the easy decision, which is it is the Elder Scrolls Online, and with no colon. Just Elder Scrolls Online, nice and easy. The title says it all, and we go from there. So in my mind, there are gamers. Like there are, of course, Elder Scrolls players who have never played an online game, but there are many, many millions of Elder Scrolls players that have played online games. So kind of the rift between the two groups is between online gamers and single-player console RPG players. That is growing very small. We make it accessible to Skyrim players, for example, who have never played an MMO. So they get into the game, they see a smaller interface than a traditional MMO. They see an awesome-looking world that looks, feels like it belongs in the Elder Scrolls IP. A quest system, which is very similar. They get a compass on screen that points them to content. It feels familiar. Of course, they're doing this with other players in the game. So the other players in the game, to them, will feel like the followers that they had in Skyrim. It'll feel like the crafter, the shopkeeper in Skyrim could very well be a guild member who's crafting something for him in the online game. So the analogs are all there, and it's just making sure that they all fit in a way that everyone understands.